Okay, so let's start the first part of what we are going to do. What advantages and limitations of laboratory experiments. So in this class, we are going to start with the comparison of experimental and behavioral economics. What is the difference between those two? They are mostly used together. But they have different visions, different aims for the economic science. So experimental methodology, how do we use experiments, advantages of lab experiments, objections to lab experiments, controlling preferences, induced value theory, and objectives of lab experiments. Okay, so we are gonna go over those things in these slides. I'm gonna post these slides to class 2. So one possible way of figuring out economics law is controlled by the experiments. Economists cannot perform the control. So this has been said in 1985. Okay, so by then they assume that economists cannot perform the control experiments like chemists or biologists, because they cannot easily control other important factors. Like astronomers or meteorologists, they generally must be content largely to observe. Okay, so they can use the data obtained outside. Okay, so they cannot use the laboratory experiments. But this is mostly changed recently. Okay, we're gonna see how it changed. Okay, economic theory through a formal deductive system provides the basis for the experimental abstraction and the experimental design, but society in most cases carries out the experiment. Therefore, economic researcher observes the outcomes of the society's experiment or performance, but has little or no impact on the experimental design and the observations generated. Okay, so these are changed. Thus, by the passive nature of the data, economic researchers are to a large extent restricted in their knowledge search to the process of non-experimental model building, and the experiment is outside the researcher's control. Okay, these are not true nowadays. This is 1988. Okay, we are going to show those how the economic science changed by using the experiments. How can we use those experiments, etc. Okay, so experiments are tool. Okay, so it's like an empirical science instead of like getting the data from the outside. For instance, there are many sources that you can data to do the empirical research. For instance, TWIG is one of them. Okay, but experimental data is another kind of source. So experiments are tools to generate data. Okay, it is not a topic. Okay, so you can work on game theory, you can work on environmental economics, you can work on industrial economics, etc. Okay, while having questions in those areas, you can use tools, right? What are the tools to obtain your data? Okay, experiments are one of those tools. Okay, so we are going to show those. So in 2002, Vernon Smith and Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize. Vernon Smith get the Nobel Prize for the use of laboratory experiments as a tool in empirical economic analysis, in particular for the study of different market mechanisms. Okay, so he's the founder of the experimental economics. We are gonna see in the second part, okay, in chapter 2, while explaining market experiments, Vernon Smith in more detail how he contributed to the markets while analyzing the markets. Okay, so this is the reason why he obtained the Nobel Prize. Okay, how about Daniel Kahneman? So in 2002, they got the Nobel Prize together. He got for the introduction of insights from psychological research into economics, in particular with regard to judgments and decisions under uncertainty. Okay, Kahneman's research is based on psychological experiments and questionnaires. He is the founder of behavioral economics. Okay, so we are going to come to difference between experimental economics and behavioral economics soon. So the irony, so these are the slides that I obtained from Ernest Ware. Okay, so this is his writing mostly. I contributed in some parts as well. But it originated from the Ernest Ware, thanks to him. So in 1991, Smith attacked Kahneman. His claim was anomalies at the individual level play no role at the aggregate level, in particular in competitive markets. So Vernon Smith was looking at the markets, right? So he looked at when he looked at the aggregate data, aggregate data converts to the predictions. Okay, but Kahneman is looking at the individual level. There are deviations in the behavior at the individual level. So Smith is saying that anomalies at the individual level play no role at the aggregate level. At the aggregate level, we obtain the prediction. Okay, so this is, by the way, still one of the decisive questions. Okay, so whether you are going to look at the aggregate level, what you obtain, is theory predicting well or not? What are the anomalies? I think both of them are important. So what is the behavioral economics? Behavioral economics uses facts, models, and methods from neighboring sciences to establish descriptively accurate findings about human cognitive ability and social interaction, and to explore the implications of those findings for economic behavior. The most fertile neighboring science in recent decades has been psychology, but sociology, anthropology, biology, and other fields can influence economics as well. Behavioral economics is deeply rooted in empirical findings or methods and advances economics on its terms, generating theoretical insights, making more accurate predictions of field phenomena, and suggesting better policy. Okay, behavioral economics is related to nudges. For instance, maybe I told you in the 203, okay, so there's something called the status quo bias. Okay, for instance, I think in the earlier driving license, okay, so when you are getting a driving license as a status quo, we are ticking, I don't know, I don't remember whether I am asked about this question, but you don't, the status quo is the original status quo is you don't want to give your donate your organs if you die in a traffic accident. Okay, so this is the default option. Okay, so they made many experiments. Okay, if the default option is changed to you want to donate your organs if you die, the donation rates increase so much. Okay, so default is people are using default in general. They don't want to change their decisions. Okay, they are not inclined to change their decisions. So while choosing the defaults, you should be careful. Okay, so these are the behavioral things that can affect. Actually, we can use this behavioral economics insights in the case of COVID too. Okay, so there was nice slides produced by actually Elif Özbay. I will post those too, even though behavioral economics is not the part of this course. I enjoyed it quite much. So how you should perceive the COVID case, to understand people behavior. Okay, so why, even though there is a high risk of getting sick by COVID, why some of people don't care much? Okay, what is the underlying reason? Okay, and behavioral economics is making some small changes to affect the behavior. Okay, so this is the reason why we have suggesting a better policy. Okay, they are using, so there are many nudge units, they are saying nudge units, right? So they are changing the phrasing in the letters for the text, collecting the taxes, for instance, okay? And these are affecting people's behavior. And this is a way to do things as well. It is helping, okay? So maybe some of you watched Social Dilemma. I don't know, it affected me quite much. In there, they're also using behavioral science, okay? So, but they're using it in a worse way, because to make you addictive to social media, okay? So what are the ways of you to use social media more, okay? This is their aim, to increase your usage, okay? So you need to be eyes open what can be the effects, but the policies that are used, for instance, what I'm saying for the organ donations, for the greater good, okay? Even for that, you should think more, of course, whether you are utilized or you're abused, right? So that may be the case. In the social media case, some of the things are abusing your time, abusing your free will, etc. Okay, so you should think more carefully while you are choosing your actions. Okay, so what is the difference between experimental economics and behavioral economics? Experimental economics is essentially a method of empirical investigation. Okay, so this related to data. Instead of like obtaining the data from Twig, you want a more controlled environment, for instance, right? So the data you obtain from the field is not that controlled. You need to check many things to get a clean data, okay? So in the laboratory, you obtain a clean data. You can exactly know what affects the behavior, or what affects people's choices, okay? Behavioral economics is concerned with importing relevant insights from other disciplines and exploring their implications for economics. Since these insights have previously been neglected by economists, it is in opposition of the mainstream economics, okay? So you saw in 201 or 203, okay, we are making many assumptions about people, right? So we assume that they calculate everything very well. They choose, while making a choice, they consider their budget, they look at all of the alternatives, and they choose the best for themselves. Or in a game, in a repeated game, they calculate all the backward induction thing. They always choose the optimal things in all periods, etc., which is not the case, right, in our cases. So by looking at the behavior of the people, we should update our models. Okay, we should update our models. So we are not saying this mainstream things are always wrong. They give us an idea about the procedure, but if they need an update, it should be updated, right? So to get better, precise predictions for people's behavior, right? So okay. So experimental papers have been very successful during the last decade. Okay, so for instance, Walton-Oakenfold's A Theory of Equity, Reciprocity and Competition. So this is one of the most cited papers in AER since 1998. So Fair and Schmidt paper, Kammerer Hall paper, okay, Rotanera reinforcement learning paper, etc. Okay, so you can check those paper. They are very nice paper. We are going to go over some of those in the social preferences part. For instance, Bolton, Oakenfold, and Fair and Schmidt, we are going to go over those. But these are the learning papers. We will not go in detail on those. You can check. They can attract your interest. Okay. What are the components of an experiment? Environment. So what do we mean by environment? It's preferences, technologies, endowment, and experiments should be implemented by appropriate monetary incentives. Okay, so we are using real money to analyze people's choices, right? And we use institutions. What is the institution? Institutions is the rules of the game. Okay, so they include feasible actions, sequence of actions, whether it's going to be simultaneous, it's going to be sequential, information conditions, whether everybody knows everybody's actions or everybody's initial endowments, etc. So lab experiments often define a game. Game theory and experimental economics are strongly related and affect each other. Okay, so as I said, experimental economics is a tool for data collection. It cannot be the area that you are working on. You can work on game theory, basically, as a researcher, but you can use experimental tools to understand, for instance, people's cooperation. Okay, if you are running experiments in prisoners dilemma games, you can use experiments to understand people's cooperation behavior. Or if you are using, for instance, second games or minimum effort game, etc., you are working on coordination games, and you are using experimental economics to understand how people coordinate. Okay, so this is like defining the area of work that a researcher can do. Okay, a researcher doesn't say in general, I'm an experimental economics. He can use experimental economics mostly, but in what questions? Okay, and framing of the instructions. These are the components of the laboratory experiments. In the last part, for the framing of the instructions, in general, experimental economics use um, uh, unbiased terminology. Okay, so they do not want to describe the situation um, as a real world case. They are trying to use neutral language, okay, as much as they can. Even saying, for instance, if you are playing a game in a prisoner's dilemma, even saying even your partner or opponent may affect your behavior. Okay, so your partner, if I say your partner, I may lead you to cooperate more. Okay, if I say your opponent, I may lead you to defect more often. Okay, so instead of that, maybe you are first player, second player may choose blah blah. This is more neutral. Okay, so you should be careful while writing your instructions, for instance, for the experiments that you are designing for your research project. You should use as neutral language as neutral as possible. Okay, due to these reasons, I'm going to explain why we are using neutral languages. Okay, so this is the laboratory. Maybe some of you participated the experiments that I was running in the department. Okay, so these are the participants, and they do not see each other's screen. And this is the experimenter. Okay, so this is the classical laboratory for running the experiments. Okay, so what happens in an experiment for those who haven't participated in any experiment until now? Hopefully, after the pandemic, you can participate. A group of people receives instructions that place them at a schematic representation of an economic situation where they have the role of certain agents, for instance, firms, consumers, workers, game players, etc. Each participant can choose from several options, each of which involves certain monetary gain, depending on what the other participants do. Okay, so this is the incentives given in the experiment. Okay, so you need to, if you are running an experiment, you need to give a real money to incentivize people. Okay, so we are going to discuss using hypothetical money is not effective. Okay. Organizers observe and record the decisions made by the participants in the experiment and use this data as a source of information on the economic problem to be studied. Okay, so as I'm saying, experimental economics is used for generating data. Instead of getting data from outside, we obtain data in a controlled environment like a laboratory. Okay, so let me explain the methodologies. These are the terminology that we are using. I'm going to explain what is the treatments. Treatment structure. The treatment structure can be between subjects versus within subject. While reading an experimental paper, you will come across those things. Okay, incentives, replication, control, and fatal errors. Okay, let me explain those for the methodology. So a treatment is a completely specified set of procedures which includes instructions, incentives, rules of play, etc. Okay, so this is what you are going to change. So a treatment is changing depending on your question. Okay, what you want to test. Okay, depending on what you want to test. For instance, consider prisoner's dilemma game. Whether you play the same person in an unknown time. Okay, so in infinitely repeated game, so the future is discounted at some value. Okay, that's as we discussed in 203. Okay, or a foreigner. In every period, your partner is changing. Okay, second player is changing. This is a treatment. Okay, what you are measuring with that. If the partner is changed in every period or fixed, is going to affect your cooperation behavior. Depending on your research question, you will decide on the treatments. Okay, what treatments you are going to use. I'm going to go over a public good game at the end of this part to clarify those things. Okay, so we usually have a baseline treatment for comparisons. Subjects are randomly assigned to the treatment conditions, rules out the selection bias. Okay, so you are not gonna, for instance, you are not gonna, in one treatment, you are gonna use econ students. In another treatment, you are gonna use business administration students, for instance. Okay, you cannot do that. We are announcing the experiments to everyone, and then among the ones who wants to participate to the experiment, we are randomly allocating them to the treatments. Okay, so this is important because from treatment to treatment, one thing is changed. Okay, if you use different subject groups in each treatment, you are changing two things at a time, and it may confuse the things what you are measuring. Okay, so the difference in the actions, for instance, can be due to treatment or the group. Okay, whether the subjects participating to those treatments or our econ or IR students can affect the behavior or the treatment. So we cannot measure it completely. So so hence, to overcome this problem, we are assigning subjects randomly to treatments. So the experiments typically involve a pair of treatments. It can be 4, 6, 8, but the smaller is better. Okay. In a paper, you're going to see that while reading a paper, generally one main question or two main questions are answered. Okay, and these questions are represented through the treatments. Okay, so let me explain what is the between subject design and within subject design. In between subject design, half of the people are assigned to each treatment. Okay, so for instance, remember the prisoner's dilemma example that I gave, fixed partner versus changing partner, stranger protocol or partner protocol. Okay, if one person is participating in only one of those treatments, okay? So you are first inviting everybody to the experiment. You are dividing the participants into two. Half of them are participating the partner treatment, half of them are participating to the stranger treatment, okay? So this is how between subject design occurs. In within subject design, each person makes decisions in both treatments. In this design, each person's behavior in one treatment is compared with the same person's behavior in the other treatment. Okay. So in the within subject design, same subjects participate in all of the treatments. Okay, so there are advantages and disadvantages of these designs. We will go over those now. If behavior is slow to converge, or if many observations are required to measure what is being investigated, then the between subject design may be preferred, since it will generate the more observations in the limited time available. Moreover, subjects are only exposed to a single treatment, which avoids sequence order effects. Okay, the advantage of within subject design is that individual differences are controlled for by letting each person serve as their own control, person-specific fixed effects. In general, a within subject design is more appealing if there's a high behavioral variability across individuals, so to control for the individual fixed effects. It's cheaper to conduct, but there's a problem of order effect. The order of treatments that subjects go through might affect his or her decisions. So the solution is counterbalance the treatments. Okay, so let me show you how it happens. Okay, so if you have two treatments, A and B, and you're running like this AB, you need to run BA as well. BA as well. Okay, so if you have three treatments A, B, C, then you need to have 6 different versions. B will start first, then AC. B will start first, then CA. C will start first, then AB. C will start first, BC, etc. Okay, so you need to have 6 different versions, so that whether there's an effect of having A treatment first, then B treatment second, or C different last, is different than having C as first, then A as second, or B as last, etc. So there shouldn't be any order effect. Okay, so then again, you are changing different things, both treatment and the order. If there is no order effect, then you can pull the data and then analyze the treatment effects. Okay. Problem subjects going through different treatments might become aware of the general setup of the experiment. Okay, so this is the problem with the within subject design. Okay, so since the subjects know what we are changing from each treatment, they can know what is your aim, what you are trying to measure. And for instance, if you are teacher of them, they may try to please you. Okay, so this is called as experimental demand effect. Okay, so you don't want something like this while running your experiment, to create something called as experimental demand effect. Okay. As I said, you should give incentives. Okay, actually, this is the difference between running experiments in economics and psychology. Okay, psychologists do not give money in general. Okay, but we need to give money to incentivize people. Okay, so economics experiments typically involve monetary decisions like prices, costly efforts, etc. So hypothetical incentives are not effective. For example, people have been shown to be more generous in offers to others when such offers are hypothetical than when generosity has a real cost. Okay, for instance, we are going to see a dictator game at the end of these slides. I will explain you. There are hypothetical part and real money part, there is a difference between the behavior. Or they may take more risk when gains and losses are hypothetical, okay? So in the second part of this class, we are gonna see that an experiment in which risk aversion is measured, and in that, this is Holt and Laurie paper, actually 2002, in that when gains or losses are hypothetical, people behave differently if they are real. Generally, real cash payments are used in research experiments. Okay, so one of the main advantages of the experimental analysis is the ability to repeat the same setup numerous times in order to determine average tendencies that are relatively insensitive to individual or group effects. So replication requires that instructions and procedures are carefully documented. This is the reason when you are submitting an experimental paper, you need to also submit the instructions so that if someone wants to replicate your results, they can use the same instructions as you do. Okay, it is essential that instructions to subjects be written as a script that's followed in exactly the same manner with each cohort that's brought to the laboratory. Okay, having a set of written instructions helps ensure that biased terminology is avoided, and it permits other researchers to replicate the reported results. Okay, so biased terminology is, as I explained, if I running a experiment related to firms and workers, we are not saying that you are firms, the others are workers, etc. Subject A is, instead of firm, you are saying subject A. Instead of worker, you are saying subject B, etc. You are using, we are not using the same framing that is used outside. Okay, so in the laboratory, you know what is going on, you know that your problem, you know the problem that you are trying to solve, or you are trying to observe, but you frame it in a natural language to the subjects. Okay. A second main advantage of the experimentation is the ability to control the factors that may be affecting the observed behavior, so that extraneous factors are held constant as the treatment variable changes. Okay, so you know, you have a model. In general, you have either a theoretical model or behavioral model, and then you are trying to test its predictions. Okay, and you know the things, the variables that are affecting the behavior or choice of firms or workers in your model. You are keeping all other things, and you are focused on what the variable that you are changing. Okay, treatment is that. Okay, so the most common cause of loss of control, we are going to come to an example so that you understand it better. Okay, the most common cause of loss of control is changing more than one factor at the same time, so that it's difficult to determine the cause of any observed change in behavior. So this is what I was explaining you earlier. Okay, so for instance, in a between subject design from treatment to treatment, if you also change the group, for instance, Econ versus IR students, you are changing two things at a time, so that it's hard to measure the causes for the change of behavior. Okay, hence you need to select subjects randomly. Okay, also you shouldn't change multiple things from treatment to treatment. Okay, what are the fatal errors? Inappropriate incentives. Okay, you should incentivize subjects well enough. So we are giving, like, for hourly, we are determining the hourly payment, average payment, according to the minimum wage. Okay, what is the hourly payment according to minimum wage? It shouldn't be below that. Okay, so non-standards instructions and procedures. Non-standards means biased instructions should be avoided. Loss of control due to failure to provide calibrated baseline experiment. You should first do control. Depending on the control, you should have the treatments. Loss of control due to change in more than one design factor at the same time. Okay, so let's stop in here. I will continue in another recording.